When they anoint the kings in the Davidic line with this with the anointing oil, a motion osa elo alamayon. They anoint him by a wellspring. It's not you anoint him in a room, it should be done by a wellspring. What is it? We know that on Rosh Hashanah, we eat certain foods which are considered good omens. We eat the head of a fish to indicate we should be leaders, not followers. And we do many things to engender something positive. Now, the Davidic line is eternal, as we said before. It was given to David and his children eternally. When you anoint the king, it represents a blessing, because just as Mayon is a natural wellspring, the water flows, relatively speaking, forever, because there's an ongoing source of water which feeds that wellspring. Identically, when you anoint him, his malchus, his kingship, should be continuous, should not come to an end. That's the good omen. That's what it represents. Now, we had earlier Shmuel Navi, Samuel the prophet anointed King Saul. What did he anoint him with? With a pach shemen, with a receptacle of oil. When Shmuel anointed David, it was with a horn. What's the difference between a receptacle, a vial, and a horn? A horn extends outward. It's elongated. The pach indicated that the vial, that Saul's kingship is going to be short-lived. It's limited to that. But a horn, in terms of its shape, it's elongated. Just as the horn extends itself, identically, the kingship of David is eternal. It extends itself. It's ongoing, non-ceasing. Okay? So just as the horn is an indication of the continuum of his kingship, identically, you do it by a wellspring to indicate that's an ongoing kingship. A Moshe Melech ben Melech. Let's say the king, David, was anointed. King Solomon didn't have to be anointed because he's ben Melech. Elam Ker Hoyso Shom Machloikis O Milchama. Unless there's a machlokas. What's the story with King Solomon? There was a question: who was going to be David's successor? So we read one of the Haftorahs with Adoniyo, who was a brother of Shlomo, and he already had declared himself as his father's successor when his father was on his deathbed. Bathsheba, the mother of Shlomo, Solomon was advised by Nosna Novi, she should go and before her husband passes away, that David should publicly proclaim that Shlomo Melech is his successor, not this Adonio. So Shlomo only really didn't have to be anointed because he was Ben Melech, he was the son of the king. But because there was machlokes, there was a question of who actually was going to be the natural successor. So that's the reason why Shlomo Melech had the anointing oil. That's what he says. Elam Kain hoisha machlokes, unless there was a dispute, who's going to be the successor? O Mulchama, or there's a war going on. Moshe also salke machlokes. So the anointing oil going on one of the two is to confirm that this is the one, and therefore there's no basis for a disagreement. That's what he says. Therefore, Solomon, although he was the son of the king of David, he was anointed because Adonio had claimed that he has the right to the throne. So to put it to rest, that's why Shlomo Melech was anointed with the anointing oil. V'yoash mimnei oslio, umoshcho yoyochos mimnei yokemochiv, and Yoyochos was anointed because of his brother. The question is, Yoyochos will be the king or him? So therefore, Yoyochos was the one to be anointed. But second. Okay. The one of the commentators explains, it says either there were two sons and there was a disagreement, or there was Muhammad. What's the Muhammad? Meaning Muhammad means that the people do murmurings. The murmurings, who is, who's not. That means it foments war. You could have a civil war. Who should be the leader? So to quell those murmurings, you anoint one of them with the anointing oil. Okay. Now, what about honoring king? We had said many times, although the Torah says you have an obligation to acknowledge a Torah sage, it's a positive commandment. But if the Torah sage chooses to waive his honor, he has a right to waive his honor. He has a right. What about a person who's a prince? Does he have a right to waive his honor? He has a right to waive his honor. What about a king? It's explicit in the Torah. He's not permitted to waive his honor. A king. At what level of honor do you give him? Do you honor him as you honor anyone? Or the honor, the way you honor a king, it's at a level which it's obvious that it's something which is unique to this person because of his station, because of his status. So Rambam writes, Koved Godel Nogim B'Melech. You interact with the king with a level of honor which is exceptional. Koved Gadol. Omesimin lo emo v'yira b'lev kolodom. And he has an aura that he implants fear and trepidation in the heart of every man. That's his persona. His persona is that he's uncompromising. Shenemar som tosim, the Torah reiterates it. It say appoint a king. What's som tosim? Som tosim, the reiteration means shetei imosu alecha, that he has to be dealt with in a way that his fear always should be upon the people. Because that's part of what? Of laying down the law. He represents the law. So because he's a person who lays down the law, therefore anything that comes from his dictate has to be adhered to. And Rochman al Suso. You're not permitted to ride the horse of a king. His steed, his mount, you're not permitted to ride his horse. Disrespect. It's like a child is not permitted to sit in the seat of a chair, a location that's designated as the father's location. A child is not permitted to sit there unless the father allows it. It's a disrespect. The horse that's ridden by the king, it's a disrespect. Anybody else should ride that horse, only the king himself. And Yoshev al Kiso, somebody else wants to sit on the throne. Does he have a right to sit? Again, if somebody else sits on the throne of the king, what is that an indication of? The honor of the king is being compromised. Then Mashtamshin Shavito, a king has a scepter, which he extends to indicate who can enter, who cannot enter. Someone else is not permitted to use his scepter. Lo b'kisro, no one is permitted to wear the crown of the king. Lo be'echad mikol klei tashmish, of any one of his personal effects, which is unique to the king, his personal effects, nobody else is permitted to use that. Uchshemeis kula nisrafan lefonov. And when he dies, the king dies, all his personal effects are destroyed in his presence, meaning at the funeral, to indicate that this man has a certain level of representation. No one is permitted to benefit, even the next king. Each king in his own right has his own dimension of value. Let's say he had personal attendants and servants. Only a king is permitted to use those servants and those attendants. A commoner is not permitted to use it, to use these people. Now, let's say the widow of a king. Is the widow of a king permitted to a commoner after the king passes away? No. There's a whole question, could another king marry the widow of a king, where we're not speaking where they were brothers or as a father and a son. Avishag, who was Avishag? We read in the prophet, when David was old, he was very cold, and they sought out a woman who would lie near him. He never cohabited with her, that her body warmth would warm him. So this woman, what was her value? She was attending to a need of the king on a very personal level, keeping him warm, because only natural body heat kept him warm. After David passes away, it was not his wife, this Avishag. She was not his concubine. She was the woman who actually would provide a certain service to him to warm him when he was cold. After David passed away, Avishag is not permitted to anyone, because that accommodation was initially for the king, and the person who accommodated the king cannot accommodate anybody else in that context. Okay, so therefore he concludes, Avishag was permitted to Shlomo because it was not his father's wife. The wife of the father is an incestuous relationship, the concubine of the father. But here she wasn't his wife. He says, therefore Avishag was permitted to Shlomo, but to Adonio was not permitted. Adonio, since he was not the king, so if you're not a king, even though he's the son of David, he's not permitted to use the personal effects of his father. But Shlomo was the king. It's not considered inappropriate if he uses the personal effects of his father. So therefore, Avishag, who was the person who attended to his personal needs, even though it was at a very, very personal level, for Shlomo was permitted, for Adonio was not permitted.